There is a certain hormone, so it's anti-Müllerian hormone, or AMH is the acronym, but often that's used to kind of give an idea, an indication of how much eggs or egg reserves you have, so that women can gauge their fertility. And I've seen clients that are in their 20s that have very low AMH levels. So for them to know then can actually give them more options.
Welcome to the Wellness Breakdown, where we examine the latest health trends and we discuss how lifestyle and nutrition can truly change the way you live.
I'm Eve Kalinik. I'm a nutritional therapist, author and consultant.
And I'm Rose Ferguson. I'm a functional medicine practitioner and also an author.
Yeah, we haven't always been in this game. Rose spent most of her youth on international catwalks as one of the most iconic 90s supermodels.
I'm not sure about that, but Eve had a very hectic career as a fashion PR. So we've definitely been there, we've done it, and there is no room here to preach.
Yeah, this isn't one of those waggy fingers should do podcasts. We're here to dig into some of the wellness trends, figure out whether some of this stuff is just nonsense, and give our personal and professional opinions on some of it.
It amazes me that the global wellness industry is now worth over $5 trillion. So before you go out spending your hard-earned cash on the latest new thing, make sure you listen to the Wellness Breakdown first. The Wellness Breakdown is sponsored by Ancient and Brave, a mission-driven wellness brand with an award-winning range of collagen, MCT oil and nootropic blends. From supporting menopausal symptoms to supercharging your energy, Ancient and Brave's products are pure, potent and easy to make part of your daily, morning or wellness ritual.
Personally, I find the True Collagen really easy to take, and I normally add it into my morning coffee, which is a habit that I already have ingrained. I'm never going to miss my morning coffee, and it's definitely a way to maintain consistency.
Yes, well, I love collagen too, and I've been using Ancient and Brave for a very long time, and I do use it with clients. I use it for myself. I do actually love the cacao blends. I love the collagen one with cacao. Delicious.
Yeah, and what really sets them apart is their sustainability. They're a B Corp as well as a member of the 1% for the planet. This means donating 1% of all sales to environmental causes that protect the planet, because collective action adds up. So buying their products means you're supporting the planet too. Visit 1%fortheplanet.org to learn more. Welcome to season 5 of the Wellness Breakdown. Can't believe we're at season 5, Rose. Quite shocking, really. Anyway, we've got lots of great topics lined up for the series, and thank you everybody for writing in and all the suggestions. Some are really, really close to our hearts and things that we feel really personally passionate about, that we really wanted to discuss with you guys.
Yeah, we're going to talk about nutrition and lifestyle and how it can help you at various stages of life, from fertility to menopause. We're going to have a look at adrenal health. We're going to ask why plant-based diets are not always good for us. We're going to cover loads of things that I hope will be interesting to you.
Yeah, and we thought for this series, we'd just take a different approach and have more of a conversation around some of these topics rather than it being challenges that we did on previous seasons. So we're going to bring in our professional, our personal experiences, and also invite some really special guests on to share their knowledge. So in this episode, we thought we would tackle quite a biggie, actually, and one that both Rose and I see an awful lot in our practice. And I think the conversation is getting more, I guess, out there generally, but there's also a lot of confusion, and that is around fertility. So we kind of wanted to look around what that kind of means, how we can support that through our nutrition, our lifestyle choices, and some of the options that are out there, and help you guys to maybe figure out some of this stuff together.
Yeah, we wanted to look at possible underlying reasons for infertility, and also just to open the subject up, because I don't think people do talk about it. And when we were talking through what we wanted to cover this series, fertility came up, and I said to Eve that I had been speaking to a client who had just frozen her eggs and was shocked to find out that there was very little information about it. And so I think it's a really interesting and appropriate subject to be talking about, and I think people should be talking about it more.
I mean, from a personal perspective, we both come from very sort of different angles in a way.
Yeah, so we do. We both, so just in a nutshell, I have 3 children. I was a single mum when I was 24. And then I went on to have 2 others, and I had all my kids quite young. Comparatively these days, it's not actually that young.
My experience is that I'm 45 and haven't, for whatever reason, haven't met the right person yet and haven't necessarily had the opportunity to have a family. And I guess I'm quite philosophical about the whole thing, in that I think I've come to terms with the fact that that might not be my journey, but nevertheless I have explored the egg freezing option, and also even embryo freezing. So it is something. So like I said at the start, I think the conversation is opening up, but I think also, to agree with you as well, Rose, I think only if you're kind of looking for it, and you really have to dig quite deep for it. But I do think that things like the egg freezing, for instance, is a lot more common in a way than it was, say, like 10 years ago. And that's a lot to do with the technology as well, actually. So yeah, I'm happy to sort of divulge some of the things that I've learned along the way as well.
Thank you. That's really kind, Eve, to share that, because obviously it's very personal to people, and it is an emotional journey too, for many different reasons. Some people, I think we're going to talk a bit about, I know that my experience with friends of mine who are my age, so I'm 48, no, I'm not 49, damn it. They
but you don't look it, Rose.
Thanks, babes. They have, my oldest friend from school chose not to have children, and I think it's interesting to me that, and when she talks about the response that she gets when she says she doesn't have children, and I think when we were talking about this, Eve, you said that you think that that's changed, and perhaps my children's generation won't have that sort of "oh, poor you" look, but it must be quite difficult for women if they've chosen not to have children. Or, as you said, actually, when we were talking about it, if they haven't been able to have children, it's a very, very complex emotional topic. But we're also going to look at things you can do to help and the avenues you can go, which I think, Eve, you're well versed in because of your own personal experience as well as your clinical experience.
Yeah, definitely. Clients that I see that are going on the fertility journey don't really think about, or haven't had so much empowerment around their menstrual cycles up until the point that they're like, oh, actually now I want to get pregnant. And when I was younger, it was like you did everything possible to not get pregnant, but nobody was also having a conversation about how do you support your fertility when you're younger, and how do you, I guess, take ownership of your hormonal health. And I think it's really, really important, and something that I talk to a lot with my younger clients as well is, understanding that, looking at your cycle, like, is it regular? If it's not regular, let's think about why it's not regular, things like regular testing of hormones and all this sort of thing, because I think there's just, unfortunately, not enough chat around periods and what is normal and what's not normal. And I do think it is definitely shifting in terms of the generation. Like, I don't think I really ever had a full-on conversation with my mum about periods, if I can be brutally honest.
It's interesting, the use of talking about the pill, the way the pill gets used still. It gets used to stop a period if you're on holiday. It gets used to stop period pains. It gets used to stop excessive bleeding. It's never looking at why have you got excessive bleeding? Why have you got horrendous period pains? And I understand it's a very quick way to achieve that, but the implications further down the line don't get looked at. I think getting a base level would be really good. So we know, if you think talking about menopause, which has opened up a whole conversation about female hormones, when we think about menopause, what's really not very helpful is that we have no baseline. So when a woman comes back with very low, and they're in perimenopause, we have nothing to gauge that menopause picture, that hormone picture against. We've got nothing to because everyone's completely different. So by that I mean, if a woman has very, very low progesterone or estrogen, what was it like when she was 16? What was it like when she was 25? What was it like when she was 32? And without that journey being on record, it's very difficult to judge how they're doing in later years. And so it would be really good if people started understanding that keeping tabs on those things earlier on would be really helpful, and it would be really helpful for fertility too.
Yeah, definitely. And, we're not here to say, do one thing or another thing, because like you said, for some people that the all contraceptive pill has been like life
Yeah,
changing,
absolutely.
but it's a drug and it does have side effects. And I think there's the issue is that people aren't necessarily told about the side effects. And also, if there is some imbalances in the menstrual cycle, it can be a bit of a sticky plaster treatment. It's actually masking what might be going on underneath. And personally, I wish somebody had had a conversation with me about my hormonal health before I was like basically more than halfway through it, to just be like, okay, this is what happens in a period, like understanding what a period is, like how
Yeah.
the hormones fluctuate, why you feel more tired at certain times of the month, all these types of things. Like, I think it can be really useful for women. And I mean, there's different opinions around how accurate this marker is, but there is a certain hormone, so it's anti-Müllerian hormone, or AMH is the acronym, but often that's used to kind of give an idea, an indication of how much eggs or egg reserves you have, so that women can, I guess, in some way gauge their fertility. And I've seen clients that are in their like 20s that have very low AMH levels. So for them to know then can actually give them more options, before they get into their potentially, because now most women are not generally conceiving until they're in their probably 30s now. I mean, I don't know the exact stats on it, but it's definitely older. And, they could get to that point and be like, actually, do you know what? Like, my AMH level is super low, and then it's going to be really hard for them. So in the conversation around not getting pregnant, I think we also need to be thinking about just empowering ourselves and owning our fertility in a way.
Yeah, we were talking about the oral contraceptive pill. I decided to do the rhythm method, which is why I have my 24-year-old. So the oral contraceptive pill can be very good for preventing pregnancy. But I suppose as you said, finding out the root causes and finding out what's going on and understanding what your period should be like, and if it isn't, why is it not? I also think there are there are lots of things that affect fertility. Endometriosis is something that goes undiagnosed. I think the average for endometriosis diagnosis is 7 years. And in answer to your question, the average age for first babies, I think, is 31 now. It was 19 when I was a kid. So it's.
Actually, I don't know why, but it's just made me think about, when you said that, it was slightly triggering, because I feel like often like ages are just very much sometimes when you're having conversations around fertility, like the bedside manner of some of these places is not very nice, even though that's what they do. Like, they'll just be like, oh, well, you're way too old, and like all these kind of these phrases like, oh, your fertility drops off a cliff from the age of 35. And I have to say that, like, that really honestly scared me. Like, I was a bit like, because I was, like I said, I was almost 40 when I even started thinking about this. And I would say this, that it's very, very individual, to be honest. And I don't think that's also mentioned in that whole, where there's those big phrases just thrown out and very hurtful. Like I said, like, you can have people that are much younger that actually are in a less fertile state than somebody that's a bit older. I mean, obviously, as we age, our fertility is going to decline. There's no way of getting around that. But I do think we also need to be a lot more individual about this kind of thing,
Yeah, and also it's interesting, isn't it? Because what we're talking about is lack of awareness. Yet, at the minute you hit 35, people start going, well, it drops off a cliff. So there is awareness. Yeah. It's just, why are we waiting until later to bring it? Some people have primary ovarian insufficiency, which means that you may not be ovulating much younger. And to know that, as you say, when you're in your 20s, will be very helpful. Why are people finding that out in their late 30s and 40s? The other thing that is also worth talking about, because I feel like it's always very female focused, I think the first port of call is the woman, and actually that is becoming less and less the case. And if you are struggling with fertility, go and get your man checked out, because testosterone levels are dropping in men for many, many reasons. And so, it's not all on you, ladies. If it's just ladies, but and blokes, if you're listening, go and get checked too.
Definitely. No, I 100% agree. Like, it's one of my real bugbears when I get clients coming into the practice. I'm sure you get this as well, Rose, where the woman is doing like all the stuff, all the things. And I'm like, what's your husband or your partner doing? And they're like, oh, well, not much really. And it takes two to tango, literally, right? So they definitely need to be stepping up as well. And often that can be, it's not necessarily, the female that needs the extra help. So yeah, you're right. I think in this conversation, that definitely needs to be a massive part of it. I guess there's a lot of people maybe just listening and going, when do I start to do this, and how do I start like owning my fertility, like where people can go and what they can do. I mean, you can go to your GP and you can get like a basic blood test. Depending on the GP, they might run the AMH level, but not necessarily. But you can, if you've got a little bit of money, it's not going to cost an absolute fortune, but you can get some private testing done. And I think if you're even considering at some point wanting to have a family, or or just checking your fertility generally, I think it's a really good investment. I don't know how you feel about that, Rose.
No, I totally agree. It's better to know. I mean, a part of the issue, I suppose, is that I don't want to stress young women out, because young women probably aren't even thinking about having a baby. And it's not that you even need to, we're not trying to sort of scare anybody, but it is just, it is worth just going to do and having that information, even if you don't use it at the time. But it's good just to know, even though it's probably the last thing on your mind if you're in your 20s.
Well, it's just knowledge is power, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Is really the thing. And, there's other ways you can just, again, like to start owning your fertility and your menstrual cycle. There's some really great apps. So even if like you don't necessarily want to go and do blood tests or whatever, you can do like the apps. There's a few apps out there now where you can start monitoring things, and you can do things like basal temperature checking. So working out when you're ovulating and all that stuff, just to get more in tune. Because I often see clients that are like, oh yeah, I can't really remember when I had my period, and they're just they can be quite out of sync with it. So just even those things I think can be really useful self-empowerment measurement tools and things like that, and just give you an idea, really.
And actually, on a wider picture, or thinking about the wider picture, if your period is causing you distress, whether you're worried about fertility or not, it's worth getting to the bottom of. So something like polycystic ovaries could potentially create quite difficult periods, irregular periods. So it is worth, as Eve said, it's about sort of taking ownership and getting to the bottom of what the hell is going on, something, so.
Yeah, because I think the conversation around like, oh, our periods are supposed to be really awful. Well, they're not. Like, so, again, like this is where we can use some of these tools to help us to have a more pleasant period, basically.
Yeah.
But coming back to fertility, so just I guess talking around ways in which that this might, if we're thinking about conceiving. I mean, you mentioned there, Rose, that yours were like a natural conception. You didn't need to have any sort of intervention there. But there are lots of different ways now of people starting families. So IVF is obviously quite a big one now. And like egg freezing. I mean, I've got quite a few friends that have done egg freezing, actually. So I do feel like even in the last, say, 5 years, the conversation around that has massively, I feel like it's hugely changing and is a lot more commonplace in a way. It is expensive. There's no two ways about it, actually. Like IVF, egg freezing, it's super expensive. I think that's where it does irk me, really, that does. Because on the NHS, I'm not sure what the cutoff age is exactly, but it's quite young. And again, nobody's told that, really. So, if you're not able to do it that way, and I think they only give a certain amount of rounds on the NHS as it is, because it's very expensive to do. The procedure itself is hugely complex. I mean, it's quite a journey when you do embark on this type of thing.
Yeah.
Like injecting yourself every day. I mean, if you're with a partner, they can help you do it, but it's not nice at all. And the side effects are not nice at all. But then obviously, this is where science is amazing, isn't it? And, you have those opportunities.
Yeah. And I think again, because it falls on the woman, it's incredible that women go through that, because I haven't spoken to a single client who's done IVF who said it wasn't really difficult. And I think the stats of how many rounds you have to do in order to have a successful pregnancy you have to do usually more than one, probably, I think it's 3 maybe.
Usually 3 they recommend for egg freezing and IVF, yeah.
Would you say, Eve, and I don't mean to pry, but would you say you felt supported? Because that's something that I always see in clinic, and I feel like you almost have to, I feel like there should be emotional support to go with the treatment or the freezing or the IVF. Did you have that? Is that something you had?
No, I didn't actually. Not with when I was talking to the consultants about egg freezing, and I think you're really bang on there. There's a huge emotional component around it, particularly if you're a single woman doing those things. It's like almost like an admission of not having been able to, do you know what I mean? And so I think there's a whole lot of that stuff that goes around in one's head. I don't recall at all being offered any type of counselling or anything like that, but I completely agree. I don't know whether it's maybe different if you're in a partnership and you're doing IVF and things like that, because obviously that hasn't been my journey. And I mean, they were very conscientious and, caring to a degree, but there wasn't a conversation around what might be happening, like emotionally. And the thing is, it's like when you take those injections, Rose, it's like, so they give you like FSH, which basically just really, really hyper stimulates the ovaries. So you can imagine you feel like really bloated and like horrible, and just all those drugs running around in your system, and then you've got to go in, and it's very clinical. I mean, obviously, but I think some of the emotion part of it is really just kind of lacking and missing. But I'd be interested to hear about people that have been on the journey for IVF as a couple and what that was like, because what I did have counselling for, and that was quite lengthy actually, it was when I was considering the whole sperm donation thing, and to be able to buy the sperm from a reputable clinic. I mean, you can obviously get it without that, but any sensible clinic, they're going to be talking to you about, what's your setup and things like that, and are you emotionally prepared, and do you have, I think I was asked if I had, clear male role models and all this type of thing. So it was really quite lengthy there, but not around the whole egg freezing thing.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? And I know from talking to you over the last few years, it's a difficult decision to make. It's a difficult thing to go through. How do you know if you're doing the right thing or not? I mean, all those questions must come up. But thinking about fertility and for clients or for people listening, there are things that can be done to improve fertility. And I mean, I know we always start with the gut. We call it going back upstream. So you're not looking at the problem, you're going to what might be impacting your fertility. So things like lifestyle factors. Stress is a massive one. But I'm going to give you to the gut queen because Eve is the gut queen, and but gut can be environmental toxins is another big one that we can come back to. But there's lots of things that can be impacting your fertility that you have control over.
There's more and more research coming out around leaky gut, which sounds really terrible actually, but it's actually just means increased intestinal permeability, which is a bit of a mouthful. What that really translates to is that your immune system is essentially triggered because things that should stay in the gut move out of the gut, and that sets off an inflammatory immune response. But in that kind of cascade of inflammation, it can also impact on general inflammation in the body. And if the body's generally inflamed, even on a very low level, that's going to impact on, hormonal health. And, the body's clever. It's going to be like, this isn't a particularly safe environment to start making a baby. So gut health is a really important part of that. So that definitely, as in making sure that your gut barrier functioning is really watertight in a way, but also looking at the health of the microbiome, because, all being well, you might get pregnant, and not in a cesarean section birth, but in a natural birth, you are passing on your microbiome to your baby. So that's also a really important part of fertility and then moving into pregnancy. So, and then the third thing is that the microbiome also massively involved in detoxing and metabolizing certain hormones like estrogen. So maybe you see this a lot with your clients as well, Rose, where they have a lot of dysbiosis, they have a lot of imbalance in their microbiome. They might have massive hormonal fluctuations, and gut health definitely plays a massive role in this that I think is not often included. But then, stress, obviously, and the adrenals.
Yeah. I just want to go back and clarify about cesarean for people who don't understand what you mean. So when you inherit it's the start of your microbiome. When Eve said not in cesareans, the thing is, when a baby travels through the birth canal, it doesn't sound that delightful, but it inhales the vaginal fluid, and that is what starts its microbiome. If it has been born by cesarean section, that obviously doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And actually, if anyone's listening, all you need to do is to take a what's it called, a syringe, and
vaginal swab,
and put it into the mouth of the baby, and it's a very good thing to do. And that has been shown to be one of the best ways to start your baby's microbiome. This is a whole other conversation, but if you have a C-section, it's worth thinking about that.
But as well, actually, because we have different microbiomes in our body. So the biggest one is in our gut, but then the second largest one is on our skin. But then we've got a huge vaginal microbiome as well. And sometimes that can also be potentially involved in the whole fertility aspect as well. If there's a lot of dysbiosis in the vagina, so people have a lot of things like recurrent thrush, for instance, they need to be sort of thinking about their general microbiome health, because it's really interesting when we know now that as a woman is gearing up for labour, the vaginal microbiome changes and more of the lactobacillus species are present there, which is like one of the first ones that colonise the baby's gut and start the immune system. Is absolutely amazing.
Also thinking about thrush is STIs. That's another reason to get checked for all these things, because if some of them are sleeping, things that you don't know you've even got one, like chlamydia is a classic that can affect your fertility in later life, and you don't know you've got it. So just keeping an eye on those, and like you said, taking responsibility for your own hormonal and sexual health is important. I think we should talk about environmental toxins, because they're a little secret sleepy thing that we don't realise we're taking in that can have a huge impact. Particularly things like phthalates, BPA, which is plastics, pesticides. These things are what we would call, both Eve and I and people in our profession would call endocrine disruptors. But I don't think people take it very seriously when I say stop drinking out of a plastic bottle. For somebody who has got endocrine disorder, I ask them not to drink out of any plastic, to change what they're using to wash their clothes, to not have any pesticides, because the load that is in your body from all those things, those chemicals, really disrupt the endocrine system. And so taking them out would be something quite easy to do. And people think it's sort of like a small thing, but actually it all adds up. So being aware of those is important too, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. And also, just to add to the endocrine disruptors, they're disrupting my speech today. Look at your beauty products, look at some of the skincare products, because those actually do harbour quite a few things in there. Have a mindful think about that, because it's like multifactorial, all this stuff. So not one thing is gonna, like, if it's your favourite face cream, that's not going to be the one thing, but just like layered up, like you said, if you're somebody there's a lot of those things going on, and actually leads quite nicely into diet, because you can take in a lot of things through like chemical ingredients in your food. So if there's a lot of like more ultra processed food in one's diet, then that's going to add into that chemical load, because there's a lot of ingredients that you definitely don't want to be ingesting if you're thinking about fertility health. So coming back to kind of like whole foods really, and it sounds really, you always say this, Rose, it's not rocket science, but I think sometimes with all the will in the world, we end up in the supermarket and we end up like getting like sucked in with like marketing and things like that, and thinking like certain foods that are deemed sort of healthy are not necessarily as healthy as they might appear to be. So, just really thinking about like lots of plants in the diet, particularly, an abundance of bright coloured vegetables, because they're just going to bring in loads of antioxidants, and that's really important for the health of the cells, which again, if you're talking about making a baby, there's going to be multiple cells replicating there. So all of that stuff is really good. Making sure you're getting enough protein in the diet, making sure you're getting good quality fats in the diet, because we need that to make the hormones. So, stinky fish, basically. Avocados, all that stuff.
I know that lots of people are going to be asking about alcohol. And
Yes.
I don't think a glass of wine here and there, but I would definitely say the problem with alcohol is that physically there's not much benefit to it. But when we're thinking about stress and social connection, especially if you're going through fertility treatment, I don't know if they ban you from it actually, Eve, you can answer that, but I would say that having a connection with somebody and having a bit of relax, if one glass of wine is what it needs, and I would not say no, but going out and getting completely smashed is probably not going to help much. I would say it doesn't really help much of anything apart from feeling like having a duvet day the next day.
I totally agree. I mean, to be honest, they were like, you have to really like minimize alcohol, because I guess because you're just like, the hormones they're giving you are so intense anyway. I don't think you'd really want to be necessarily drinking that much, but I totally agree with you. If you're not necessarily doing the kind of the IVF or whatever, and you're trying naturally, like, I think a bit of that can sort of loosen things up, can't it? Make the whole baby making thing a bit more fun, because I think sometimes along the way that gets lost. It's just all like, right, I'm ovulating now, let's go. And so some of that spontaneous things that come out of maybe like sharing bottled wine or whatever, I've heard countless amounts of stories, I'm sure you have as well, where people sort of go, well, I'm just gonna forget about it for a bit now and go out and have a nice meal with their husband or whatever, and then they suddenly get pregnant. So
I just wanted to ask you one thing in particular, because I know I'm more supplementy than you are, so I would say that there are benefits to things like, well, actually eating fish would be better for the fats, but I think there's some, myoinositol is something that I would use possibly. I would also think about something like CoQ10 for inflammation. Is there anything in particular that you would suggest would be helpful for somebody who's trying for a baby?
I do think that supplements are game changing if they're used right in the right way. I think a lot of people just tend to rely on that and not think about other stuff. But definitely in this conversation, so things like CoQ10, there is enough evidence out there to suggest that can actually help to improve egg quality. So, but you need to take it at quite high dosages. So like 120 milligrams or more. So let's say, you are trying for a baby, that would be I personally think that's quite a sage thing to add in, especially if you're doing like egg freezing and things like that. And then, again, like just thinking about preconception, you've got to bear in mind that all being well, you conceive, that baby is going to take everything. So this is the only place really where I would use a multivitamin, like a decent one, because you're basically going to be depleted on all levels. So a decent a prenatal specific multivitamin, I think, can be really useful. Definitely fish oils, because also, again, if you're thinking ahead to like the baby and the baby's brain development, you're going to need that DHA. That's really important. So, and let's be honest, even if you were a real oily fish lover, like, you're not going to be able to therapeutically get that into your diet. And a lot of the oily fish now is farmed, so we're not getting the amount of omega-3s we need through it anyway. So I'd say that would be a really good one. Sometimes I do suggest magnesium. There's not huge amounts of data around this, but there is a little bit around magnesium can, in some instances, help to prevent early miscarriage. But again, there's not huge amounts, but I think given the fact that we live in a really stressful world, and particularly like if there is some residual anxiety or stress around getting pregnant, then you're probably going to be using up more magnesium anyway, because you're going to be stressed. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing to add in. So those would be the kind of the main ones
and also you mustn't forget about folate. B9 is quite important for,
Yeah, in a prenatal you should get that.
Supplementing around pregnancy is, well, there's not much data is because there are very few pregnant women who will undergo research randomized controlled trial, which is understandable. So often the data isn't there because the research hasn't been done, because it wasn't able to be done. So as Eve said, as we said in the beginning, eating food first is really important at this point, and eating a wide variety of coloured vegetables would probably be the number one thing to do, and just try and keep it as unprocessed as possible.
highly processed food. It's, it creates extra, well, it's not great for our gut health for a start. And that's one of the major detoxifiers. And then, like you said, like adding in additional toxins that we don't necessarily want, but they can also be high in salt, high in sugar, all these sort of things that definitely impact on our hormones.
Yeah, I was going to say that because insulin resistance is quite a big player in fertility. And so bashing your body with sugar all day, every day is not going to help the picture probably. So, so yeah. Well, I want to talk a bit about exercise and acupuncture. And support. So we talked a bit about whether you get emotional support when you're going through processes such as IVF and egg freezing. And I feel from the stories that I've heard in clinic that is lacking. I feel like the information out there is lacking. So that could be brushed up on. So I would say support from your friends and family is key. Corral as many people as you can. And then exercise-wise, for me, a big part of it is the stress picture. So if you're stressed and you're stressing your body out with extreme exercise, then you're doing the wrong thing. If you're feeling great when you're running for 5 kilometers every morning in 22 minutes, then fine. But listen to your body, and if you are tired, then take it back a notch and do some restorative, something like a gentle hatha yoga. Because I think reducing that's how I'm thinking about exercise for this, is that if you're feeling stressed, it's not going to help the situation.
Yeah. And I do think that the whole stress picture is sort of underplayed as well. Because sometimes it's just thrown out there as a bit of a woolly term and people just go, like that. But actually, when we're producing a lot of cortisol chronically, that's going to have an impact on all of our hormonal system. And most notably, if your body is in that fight or flight, like survival mode, it's not like, oh, this is an environment conducive to making another human. It's like prioritizing, life or death there. So I think that's not really explained enough to people, as in like why stress does have an impact on your fertility. But like you're right. So anything that's going to exacerbate cortisol, so from an exercise perspective, like all the kind of really high intensity type stuff is more of that adrenaline type exercise. So it doesn't mean to say you can't necessarily exercise if you're thinking about fertility. In fact, actually, when I was going through the motions of this, like I was told pretty much not to exercise. So yeah, just carte blanche, not exercise. And so I did say to them, well, are we talking about like walking? Is that allowed? Like, do you know what I mean? But they're like, yeah, you're walking. But so I think, again, it can be a bit like woolly, like what type of exercise can I do? So I guess it's more leaning into the things like the slower types of forms of exercise and things like that. So if you're somebody that's struggling to get pregnant or wants to be really focused on it, because like you said, some people, I know women that run every day throughout their whole pregnancy and have had no issues at all. But I think, obviously, like going really hard on the adrenals if you're trying to get pregnant is probably not a good idea.
It's called the cortisol steal. So cortisol will win every time because it is there, as he says, it's life or death. It is there. It thinks it's protecting you, and it's amazing for that. But it runs the same route as pregnenolone and DHEA and testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, and cortisol will win. And so if it's called the cortisol steal, have a look at it. It's quite interesting to see because it blocks the production of those sex hormones, which in turn has an effect on your fertility. So again, take a deep breath, do a bit of meditation, go for a nice gentle walk.
Particularly if you're low in progesterone, because pregnenolone does steal more of progesterone. So often, again, like there's no explanation given to people around why they're progesterone. So they just go, oh, well, you've got low progesterone, so we'll give you more progesterone. But they're not actually dealing with like what's caused that. So I've got a client at the moment where I'm just a bit like, you need to sort out the stress picture because that's what's causing the low progesterone. So you're right, Rose. It is that whole cascade thing that if you backpedal a bit, it's like, okay, well, you're really stressed out, so let's work on that. Not necessarily. I mean, again, like sometimes it's necessary to supplement with some of these hormones as part of that journey, but I think it's always we always need to be mindful about a bigger picture as well.
The bigger picture, exactly.
And then acupuncture, I love acupuncture.
Yeah,
we got you doing that. Do you remember last?
I was going to say, I think it was it last season? It was last season I did it, and I love it. I'm a total convert. But I also know, even before I'd done it, I refer, there's a great nutritionist, Emma Cannon. Do you know Emma Cannon?
Oh, yes. Emma's wonderful.
She's wonderful, and she's very, very acupuncture pro acupuncture. And she's a fertility specialist, and she, anyway, I've had so many clients who I've referred to her for fertility who think she's amazing and also think acupuncture is amazing, and it's been successful for them in many cases. Not all cases, obviously, but I think it's something worth trying.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I similarly do work with an acupuncturist called Ross Barr. His whole thing is on fertility as well. You just got to not fall in love with Ross when you meet him. I always caveat that to my clients because he's very handsome. His wife won't mind me saying that either. But again, I don't know what the data is around acupuncture and fertility, but I do know that just even in my conversations and my experience with the clinics, they were often pro that. So I'd imagine that there probably is. And it is, it can help with reducing stress and things like that, which again, we talked about why that's important. So I guess we're talking it around the subject and maybe focusing a bit on, the struggle, as it were, because often people are listening to things, they want to find answers and things like that. But I think sometimes we miss the fun part of it as well, and so, leaning on friends and family as well and doing that and making it more of a kind of, a supportive network, I guess. Yeah. I know that there are support groups and things like that, for instance, particularly if you're somebody that has gone down the whole single parenthood, sperm donation, because that wasn't my journey in the end. I decided that wasn't going to be my journey, but I did speak to a huge amount of women. There's loads of support around it. There's a load of women doing it actually. And once I started really just even dipping my toes in, I found that there was, a massive support network out there, and women that had also, gone down that route and hadn't been successful necessarily, but then they'd gone on to adopt. So there's a lot of people out there in the same boat. That's what I wanted to say, really. Yeah. And, there's a lot of people that are really open to sharing their stories and their experiences, and you just got to dip your toe in a little bit, I guess, with it.
Yeah. And I tell you what, I've really enjoyed this episode because even I do have such different backgrounds when it comes to this. So it's been lovely talking to you, Eve, and I really appreciate your honesty and openness about it. We'd love to hear from any of you if you have any comments or queries or stories that you want to share, because I think that our community would love to hear it. We would love to hear it. So email us at info@thewellnessbreakdown.co.uk, or you can message us on our Instagram.
Thank you, Rose, also for sharing your experience and personally and professionally. And I love the fact that sometimes you even make quips about the fact that you love your dogs more than your kids, which I'm not sure anyone would say that out loud, but anyway.
I tell you what, when they're being a pain in the neck, my dogs win hands down. And they never leave. They don't leave home. They always need me. The rest of them out the door, they don't care.
Well, that's it. Thanks everyone for joining us on the new season of The Wellness Breakdown. We really hope you've enjoyed the new format and enjoyed the podcast. So please subscribe and leave a comment below.
Yes, and if you're like me and are always in the car and prefer to listen to a podcast, we're on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
See you next week. Just to let you guys know that we are talking more generally here, and if you feel like you've got any contraindications to any of the recommendations or the supplements we've mentioned, please check with your healthcare provider.